All right. We're live.
All right, hello.
Podcast episode number 3 with Michael Hulbert. If you don't know this guy, he's one of the wrestling coaches at the JX Fight Club, and he's got some interesting things to say. We're going to discuss a variety of topics, including something I learned about, thanks to this guy, a few weeks back, the science of hoplology.
Yeah. Well, it's an academic discipline. I mean, maybe sciences can be applied into it, but yeah, it's an interesting subject. It goes around a few different academic disciplines, and yeah, it's been around for since the 19th century, but it's only recently, since the 1950s, been developed more seriously into academics.
Yeah, so for those who've never heard of hoplology, how would you describe that in a nutshell?
Hoplology basically I would describe it as maybe it's a mixture of humanities and to an extent maybe sciences in some facets, but it's basically the study of combative systems and human interaction in combative systems and martial arts. That's the best way I could describe it. So, like, why humans fight, what are some of the functions of fighting, what are the instruments used in fighting, and how this has kind of like developed our society in different areas such as religion, or other cultural areas such as economics or maybe politics, stuff like that.
So basically, hoplology could help answer questions like who would win in a fight, a Greek phalanx or a Zulu bull formation?
I don't know if apology can do that, but it can definitely give us an understanding of why certain cultures develop in certain ways, especially how certain military cultures develop in certain ways. In all honesty, military history can probably tell us more of who could win in certain scenarios. But again, military history does use hoplology. It's a part of their studies. And so the main academic areas that I know use hoplology in their studies, or they can be part of like a thesis for maybe somebody who's developing a master's or a PhD, would be areas like history, particularly military history. And then there's places like anthropology, obviously, because of human culture, and then a little bit of psychology, areas like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I gotta say, after reading the Wikipedia entry on hoplology, I went over to YouTube and started basically just getting lost in simulation videos of who would win in a fight, a Zulu bull formation or a Greek phalanx. And I was shocked at the quantity of videos covering that topic.
That's funny, yeah.
I'm not the only one who wondered that.
YouTube rabbit holes, man.
Yeah. It is. I'm absolutely fascinated by those two military units in particular, because they teach us a lot about the psychology behind combat. For example, like, I don't know if you know much about the history of Shaka Zulu and his conquest over the south of the African continent, but when he started coming to power, like the common way of fighting was with a long spear. And formations weren't really a thing. And he changed two really simple things. One, he took the handle off the spear to basically turn it into a short sword that you could only stab with. And you might wonder, why is that an advantage over a long spear? And if you stop and think about it, what made the Romans so successful over, say, the Celts and the Gauls? I would say was a number of things. One, the way they used their weapons. The Romans were trained to do one thing with their swords, which was stab. And a stab wound is much more fatal than a slashing wound, which the Celts would do with their long swords. And if you have a short spear like the Zulu did, there's really only one thing you can do with that: stab. So anyway, I could go off on that for a while, but let's go back to you, Michael. So you're one of the wrestling coaches, as I've mentioned. Tell us a little bit about your wrestling credentials and experience.
Well, I'm from Canada originally. I'm from Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. Started wrestling at about the age 13, 14, so I've been doing it for close to 20 years. I was a member of the Golden Bears Wrestling Club most of that time. and basically I was very lucky. I came into a time where there was some very strong heavyweights, and I was always a bigger kid, and I'm a big man, so I was very lucky. I had guys like Eric Kirshner, who was a Commonwealth Games medalist. I had men like Kobe Bell, who was a very strong Greco-Roman wrestler on the Canadian Olympic team in Atlanta in '96. And he was a national champion for a long time, kept just winning. Myself, I trained okay. I would consider myself kind of like mid-level in most things. I won a number of provincial championships. I was a continuous national medalist in the CAWA, which is the Canadian Amateur Wrestling Association. And then I did medal in nationals for CIS, which is the Canadian equivalent of the NCAA. So my main areas were freestyle wrestling, Olympic freestyle wrestling, and then Greco-Roman wrestling, which is just above leg contact.
Yeah, and if you lay hands on this guy, you'll pay attention to that Greco-Roman pedigree pretty quickly, because he likes to clinch and throw you from there. So I gotta admit, I don't know much about wrestling in Canada. Now, wrestling in the U.S., it's kind of a big deal. Most high schools have a wrestling team. Most colleges have a wrestling team. It's such a big deal in the U.S. that the IBJJF, the International Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu Federation, a few years ago, they passed a rule that in the white belt division, the following could no longer compete: professional MMA fighters, because, well, they're pro MMA fighters.
Obviously.
Judo black belts, because they would have a very specific advantage over the rest of the white belts.
Yeah.
And American collegiate wrestlers. Like, no other country is specified there. So I got to ask, first of all, how does that make you feel as a Canadian? And secondly, what's the state of wrestling in Canada?
Well, first and foremost, in regards to that, a big thing is in America, not just in wrestling, but sports culture in the United States is immense. It's really just involved in every part of your society there. I mean, you have, and I notice this more, especially when I'm further away from it. Like, I'll be speaking to international groups, and Americans will use idioms, and a lot of them are either sports-based or military-based. I'm like going, man, that's an aggressive language.
Yeah.
But it's not just that, but like wrestling is a very much big part of your culture. And then sports is very much a very heavy part of your culture. And I think it's a very positive one. Definitely no critique there, but that goes a long way. So it's just more encouraged in America. It's more developed in Canada. Really, there's wrestling. It's popular to an extent, but not like that. Other sports are, especially winter sports, that make sense for our geography and our history. So that's how I would look at it probably. And in America, it's just like any other culture that puts priority into either specific sports or all sports. In America, you have more of an all sports approach. Yes, you have your preferred ones, but in general, you like to be strong in many of them. So that's good. And then that's especially shown in certain regions, like for some region, especially in the American Midwest and South Midwest, and even a bit more in the prairies area. That's a very popular sports style to do.
Oh yeah, it's huge.
Yeah.
Out in Iowa, for example.
Yeah, exactly. Out in Iowa's extremely good example. Yeah, but the whole Midwest is pretty much a hotbed for wrestling, which is good. I don't see a really big problem with that. In regards to Canada, well, it really comes down to how much we invest in sports. We don't really invest in sports. I mean, there's certain areas. I mean, and apologies to any Canadians watching if they feel like they are invested. But what I mean by that is this: I think there's not as much societal attention or focus into numerous disciplines. There are exceptions, obviously, like hockey. But again, hockey is an extremely expensive sport to do in Canada. I mean, and
it's
the
not
kids,
just a pick up and play sort of thing.
Well, I mean, you could, but that very social aspect. If you're looking to play, like seriously though, it's just like for almost any discipline, you start early, like around 3, 4, 5 years old. You work your way up the club system. You're paying considerable amount of money to make sure you're playing well, or the parents are anyway.
Yeah.
So that's really it. And then, because I mean, in Canada we do have funding, we have carding, but I wouldn't call it a large amount of money. But yeah, it's just, that's really how it is. There's not as much focus on the sports, and I think there's numerous reasons why there's certain focus on certain disciplines and certain cultures. For example, in New Zealand, there's an immense focus on rugby, and I'm sure you would find many programs in that country will have much more funding towards that discipline.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Rugby, that's one of those things that, there are niches in the U.S. who are involved in that. It's just not a big deal.
And I think if you saw that, then there also would be that development too, because especially in America, like you're south enough, you have a climate where you can play rugby all year round, or in winter how it's supposed to be done. And so if it became a popular sport, you would see probably a lot of the same results. So anyway, I'm digressing, but when it comes to wrestling, not that shocked, especially with the way your society has developed to be very sports centric. That whole develop a strong individual, strong winner mentality. I think it's very positive. But yeah, that's probably a good reason.
Yeah. So
now, sorry, I forgot. And as for Canada, I don't know, we're a mid-level wrestling power. I mean, we're not super terrible. We're not super good. We have people that go to the Olympics. The last man that medaled, though, was Daniel Agali back in 2000. But a very good positive note about Wrestling Canada is our women's program is very strong. And a big reason for that is us and actually the Japanese. We started our programs really, really early.
Yeah.
And so that's why. And we do have very, very strong female programs. And then the women themselves, once they're done their wrestling careers, like we have many gold medalists, they're, of course, usually still heavily involved in the sport. They're usually employed of Kawa, or they're involved in wrestling in some way. Many of them become coaches. And that's, it's just become a very successful program that way.
Yeah. At the same time, Olympic medals, there aren't that many Olympic medals for wrestling. As opposed to other sports like swimming, where a guy like Michael Phelps can win 16 gold medals in a single Olympic, a single Olympics. If you look at a guy like Alexander Karlin, very decorated wrestler, what did he win? 4 gold medals in 4 times competing in the Olympics, and that's like the world record as far as I'm aware. So if you win that once, I mean that's a big deal.
Yeah. Basically, it's compared to, we are very much a Western martial arts. We're a Western discipline. There's no belt rankings or anything. So really a testament to your abilities is basically the titles you win. So, if you're a provincial or national champion in Canada, you're a solid wrestler. If you're a world champion, you're absolutely a master. If you're Olympic champion, you're beyond that. You're very much top. So that's really what I would look into that. Carolyn, especially, Carolyn invented moves. He invented specific techniques.
Oh yeah, like the Carolyn lift.
Oh, it's beautiful. And actually, that was I've seen that used a few times, and it's been done on me. It's not fun.
Man, if you don't know what the Carolyn lift is, if a wrestler goes down to his belly to try to avoid a pin, basically, if you're strong enough, you can get a grip around the body, lift him up from the floor, and then suplex him.
Yeah, exactly. It's very strong. It takes immense strength, actually. Yeah. But yeah, that's basically it. And in regards to that, actually, I think wrestling is going to be, they've been changing the rules a lot recently in wrestling. And
yeah, I've heard about this.
In the 20 years I've been doing wrestling, the rules have changed primarily 3 times. First time was more like a three bout system where you would have 10 points of superiority. It would stop the match. It was much longer minutes. Parterre was involved. Parterre means you would have times where the ref would tell you to go to the ground and begin ground wrestling. Then in order to kind of develop popularity, the rules were changed again, where it was down to 2 minute rounds, where it was 2 bouts where again but then it was 6 points superiority, and then certain throws would give you immediate win over a round. So if you did a 5-point throw on somebody, you'd win the round. And then clinches started coming more into play, and instead of having the traditional clinch, it went to a leg clinch. And then after that, wrestling almost got removed from the Olympics, and that made us change everything again. And
oh yeah, I remember that.
Now
there was a lot of lobbying to keep wrestling the Olympics the other year.
Yeah, you can point fingers all you want, but the fact is, wrestling community got lazy thinking that they always had a spot. And I'm glad that attention has been put into the sport now. And hopefully that makes FILA, the Fédération Internationale de la Lutte Association, so the International Wrestling
Association. Is that what FILA stands for? I had no idea.
Yeah. So yeah, Fédération Internationale de la Lutte Association, of course it's French, but it just means the International Wrestling, the International Wrestling Association or Federation. So basically, now it's actually very favored to Americans, I feel, because now in wrestling, it's a lot more comparative to American folk style, where you get points for escaping now. There are escapes or reversal points now, which is very similar to American wrestling. And parterre has been returned, which I think is a great idea. I don't see why parterre was ever removed in the first place. I liked it. And because I was very good in parterre, I'm a good ground wrestler. But yeah, I think it's benefits. I was researching the rules again a few weeks ago, and so going, these are good.
Yeah, that is really interesting, giving points for an escape. Now, I'm not familiar with the point system in wrestling. I'm very familiar with the point system in the various Brazilian jiu-jitsu organizations. And there's so much controversy, a lot of arguments on the internet about changing the rules of jiu-jitsu in order to make the sport more viewer-friendly. Because what tends to happen a lot, people tend to pull guard, and those aren't the most viewer-friendly matches if you're not very familiar with the sport of jiu-jitsu. So how does that change the sport of wrestling to award points for a reversal like that?
I think it just makes it more faster. It can make the wrestlers more aggressive, move faster. There's also more emphasis on penalties for being passive in a lot of the new rules in the last few years. So that's really it. They're just trying to find ways to keep the fighters moving. That's really it. Wrestling is already a very explosive style of grappling, much more in comparison to jiu-jitsu. No knock on jiu-jitsu, guys. Just it is the offensive grappling style. And it's very offensive. And people are like, well, no, jiu-jitsu is offensive. Yes, it is offensive. But in comparison, if you really have to put both of them on the table, wrestling is a very offensive style, and jiu-jitsu is the defensive style. And you do need both together to make MMA work, okay? You can't just be a fantastic wrestler and
I absolutely
not know
agree with that.
So you need both. So that's how I look at it. And wrestling is the very offensive style. It's how you attack. It's how you throw. It has the technique for that. Then jiu-jitsu, that's great for defense. It's a very correct form of grappling for defense, to just slow down the fight, to get the correct holds for submissions. That's how I would look at it.
Let's talk about a question I got from a viewer a while back. He's a high school wrestler, and he wants to start jiu-jitsu. He doesn't know much about jiu-jitsu, and he has heard that wrestling helps your jiu-jitsu, and I absolutely agree with that. I've seen that countless times. Mm-hmm. Jiu-jitsu players who learn some wrestling and their jiu-jitsu gets better because they're better able to dictate position. But he asked, will learning jiu-jitsu make my wrestling better? What do you think about that?
I think really doing any discipline outside of your own discipline will make you better. I mean, you could almost argue that doing chess in the off season can make you better at wrestling because it gives you more mental focus. All right, but that's just an extreme example just to show that really, if you do any discipline outside of your discipline, it will have applications to it. Now, obviously, jiu-jitsu would have it more so. Now, with jiu-jitsu, here's the big thing. What some people are maybe thinking is there a move in jiu-jitsu that I can use in wrestling that will affect the game? Professionally, professionally, I don't think so. I don't think there's a magic move because they're two separate sports. And one is very much based in a sports that's been a sport for much longer time than jiu-jitsu. Like jiu-jitsu still has more lethal applications to an extent. But the real big thing is this. They're apples and oranges, okay? You can't really say with full confidence there is a very specific move in jiu-jitsu that can transition into wrestling. And, well, in wrestling possibly, but jiu-jitsu had those moves already, so it doesn't count. Wrestling is a much more rudimentary form of grappling. So this is what I would say to your viewer. Yes, you should do jiu-jitsu, but probably not for the reasons you think. Jiu-jitsu, you should look at jiu-jitsu more from a practical athletic standpoint. Jiu-jitsu is just another form of grappling. It will help you learn to relax yourself when you're in positions. It'll definitely help you within parterre positions if you're doing ground wrestling, in the sense that you'll be more aware of the body that's on you or you're on. You'll become much more aware of hooks and handles that are may not used in different disciplines. So,
especially the half Nelson. That's heavily underutilized in jiu-jitsu right now.
Exactly. And so that's how I would really look at it. Other things like, grabbing the gi, I think it would actually help your grip strength maybe. So things like that. That's what I would really look into. Look at it from an athletic standpoint. And also, so that's what I would say. If you want to do jiu-jitsu, I would heavily encourage it, but not for the reasons you think. It will just make you an all-round better grappler. It will help to accent your abilities better. That's really it.
Yeah, it makes sense to me. I think contrast is an extremely valuable teacher. Let's talk about the gi for a second. A lot of people ask me about training in the gi and whatnot, and I do train in the gi twice a week. And I think it's important, but again, not for any technical reason. I wear the gi for contrast, because the gi has nothing to do with MMA, absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
Like technically, no gi specific technique is going to translate into no gi training or mixed martial arts at all. But the contrast, I believe, is a valuable teacher, and that is the only reason that I do it. Now, I got a question for you, Michael. You've been training jiu-jitsu with me for a little bit, and put on the gi, and I've noticed you took to training in the gi like a fish to water, which is really interesting to me because most submission grapplers, people coming from a no-gi jiu-jitsu background, the first time they put on the gi and try jiu-jitsu with the gi, they often find like, oh, I hate this. This is horrible. I want to get this thing off. I've lost control because it gives the opponent so many handles they didn't have before. But you didn't seem to have that issue.
That's true. I do like the gi quite a bit, actually. Yes, I'm very fond of it now. I think it's a very useful tool in the repertoire for jiu-jitsu fighters. Basically, this is probably why I do like it. I come from a Greco background, and also I came from a very specific background where I was training with really tough dudes for a long time. Like, I mean, the big part of Greco wrestling is to be actually quite tough. Like, you have to have good physical toughness to do it because there's a lot of smacking, there's a lot of grinding, which also includes things like headbutts and other things like that. So, and also at a heavyweight position. The heavier you go up in wrestling, the more it is about strength, control, and position. That's really it. If you go the lighter weights, you're looking at a much more entertaining match, that's for sure. Lightweight wrestling, they're fast, they're spry, they're just going and going and going. It's very quick movements. But once you get to heavyweight, that's not it at all. It's really very strategic positioning, knowing how to control the inside of the other man, knowing how to control the area around you. Yeah. And I think I find that feeling similar with gi jiu-jitsu because that's the idea. You're trying to find, it's more of a control position based type of grappling. And, I like that format. That's why I've come around. That's what I've kind of like developed over my own career. So yeah, I like it. Yeah.
That's interesting you should say that. I had Yunus Emery, he's a jiu-jitsu black belt, on the podcast the other day, and he was basically saying that different weight classes are basically different fighting styles in jiu-jitsu.
Very true, yeah.
So, interesting to hear we got the same thing going on in wrestling.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Like, when you're big and strong, that's just how it is,
Yeah, one of the things you said probably like 20 minutes ago about the American vernacular, how we have so many expressions based around fighting, so many idioms, and I was thinking, what are they? And I realized, we actually do. Like, a lot of them we don't even realize they're about wrestling. Like when we're kids, we, at least when I was a kid, we used to pick on each other. My older brother used to wrestle me to the ground and just try to make me suffer and say uncle, say uncle.
Exactly, yeah.
I mean, I don't know if kids still do that, but that was a thing when I was a kid. That's a reference to catch wrestling, catch as catch can wrestling, or Lancashire wrestling. Because instead of tapping out, they would signal submission by literally saying "uncle." Yeah. We got a ton of expressions in English that we don't even realize are based on wrestling.
Oh yeah, wrestling, most sports actually, and yeah, it's very dominant, especially in your culture. Not that it's not in other cultures, but especially American.
Yeah. Let's talk about training for a little bit. We had Ned on the podcast last time, and we talked about. We talked about fitness training and long, slow distance training, which in a lot of combat sports is very popular, has been for over 100 years, basically long distance running and skipping rope for extended periods of time. Did that play a part at all in your strength and conditioning regimen as a wrestler?
Absolutely. I mean, I did lots of running. I did it, but to say that type of aerobic fitness transitioned well to an anaerobic activity like combative sports, that's something else entirely. To be terribly honest, the biggest reason why I ran is two reasons. One, I need to make weight because I did go from heavyweight to light heavyweight in university. The way I like to do it, I like to run. So I would run to make my weight. Another reason is I get quite a large endorphin dump from when I run. I get it, and so I enjoy it. So I run a lot. Now, what does it directly impact wrestling fitness? I don't know enough about kinesiology or maybe even biology to comment on that, but I know this. I know it doesn't hurt, but there's other types of fitness you need for wrestling. It's much more anaerobic. You have to do different movements. You have to, like, things like stairs are quite useful, or sprinting, or shadow wrestling, or doing plyometrics. These are much better forms of, like, maybe possible fitness for especially a wrestler. But I mean, running doesn't hurt. I think most coaches I know would definitely not discourage running. I did it all the time to develop a base for my fitness. My coaches always made me do runs in the early part of the season usually. So yeah.
Yeah, I used to do a ton of running when I was younger, but I don't anymore, mostly because it hurts my joints. I can run like 5-10 minutes, then my hips start just grinding on top of each other. Other activities like grappling, for example, I can grapple all day long, but running, though, man, it's not what it used to be. So I got a question for you about strength and conditioning. Kind of a two-part question. What is the strength and conditioning that you did personally as a wrestler, and how much does that resemble what you would say is the ideal strength and conditioning regimen for a wrestler?
Okay. Well, there are a bunch of things you should do. Now, to full disclosure, when I was wrestling and when I was at the peak of my wrestling performance, I should have trained more in weightlifting, and I came more to knowledge about this as I got older. The reality is I'm very naturally strong, so that's a benefit on my behalf. But yeah, I did do training. Now, what I can tell you is this, and this is pretty true from what I understand and from what I did and what others do in wrestling, is that explosive weightlifting like powerlifting, Olympic lifting, these are very good because you need to be explosive in wrestling. So, doing a clean and jerk is a very essential move. Using kettlebells are a very useful move. Doing squats, obviously, doing military press, doing bench press, all of this is very necessary. And you want to do it at high volume for a considerable amount of repetitions. The higher the volume and the more repetitions you can do, obviously that will be reflective on the mat. You will be, because you have to go for a considerable while pushing another human being. So that's really it. You just need to get down to those. You just need to get down to that type of simple lifting, really. Well, I mean, it's complex to learn, but it's just a few simple things. Besides that, other things come into play. You do have to have decent plyometrics. You have to be good at gymnastics. Okay at gymnastics. You have to be able to climb a rope using your own body weight. You have to be able to also do drills and techniques with another human being, usually around your weight. So things that we always did that were great for developing strength is, throw a man on your back, you go up the stairs, up and down. Or you put a man on your back, you do lunges with them. Things like that. Or you even flip each other around. Like, these are all very common things because it makes the most sense, because that's the whole point. You're fighting a person. You should be able to move the body easily.
Yeah, I had an epiphany about grappling and jiu-jitsu in general a number of years ago. So I talk a lot about Big Dave, my friend, my student. He's a big dude. Haven't seen him around the gym in a while, but when I first met him close to 7-8 years ago, he was just so big and so massive. I had such a hard time grappling with him. And I had this epiphany. I don't have to be stronger than Dave to hold my own on the mat with him, but I do need to be strong enough to control his weight. So he weighed about 110 kilos, so I went to the weight room and I did deadlifts until I could easily deadlift 110 kilos for reps, until I could squat 110 kilos and so on. And I found after that, even though I was not nearly as strong as he was, being able to grapple with him was considerably easier.
That is very spot on. I would agree with you 100%. So yeah, there you go. And as for weightlifting, you need to do things like that. Kettlebells are not used enough, in my opinion. I think they're quite a good exercise. So you should use those a lot. And just chin-ups, ropes are good, things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You ever heard of a mace bell?
I think I have.
I first saw one maybe about 10 years ago. A friend of mine, a catch wrestler, Jake Shannon, he kind of started pioneering them in the U.S. I mean, they started in India anciently, but
Okay, I know what this tool
yeah,
is
he
now,
tried
yeah.
to bring them into the
Yeah.
mainstream some time ago. Yeah, just wondering if that's something you'd heard of.
I have heard of it. Have I used it? No. But, 2,000 years of Indian wrestling culture can't be that wrong. I've wrestled many Indian guys. They're pretty strong. It's a huge part of their culture. So
Yeah.
there you go.
Man, Indian wrestling, man. I've heard of at least two different styles, but I got another question here, though. Because training methods, sometimes they stay pretty consistent, and sometimes people get these ideas like, modern training methods are so much better than what they were doing 100 years ago or whatever. Wrestling methods today, would you say they are different or roughly the same as they were a decade ago, 20 years ago?
Truthfully, I think there hasn't been much change in the training process except for maybe specific things. Kinesiology probably plays a bigger role now. I would think also nutrition plays a much bigger role now. And then maybe methods of recovery. That would be one of them. In regards to training, there's people always developing their own methods, but I don't really see anything too large changing unless there's a study that comes out that proves something to be ineffective. But really, wrestling, it's been an Olympic sport since the beginning of the modern Olympics when it was in Greece. And I just don't really see much changes from then until now. I mean, and all the time I've done it, I really haven't seen huge changes in training, but maybe things like that, maybe in just recovery, more emphasis on certain weightlifting. But as in regards to the actual training on the mat, no, I don't think so. You go in, you do a warm-up, you do some plyometrics, you do drilling for about a good straight hour. You'll start just doing regular drills and then specified drills, and then maybe you'll learn a new move. You work on that for a while, then you do some more drills. Then you'll do some situational live wrestling, then you do some live wrestling, and that's pretty much it, day in and day out.
Yeah. So there are a few wrestlers, like just strict wrestlers, that I recommend that my students watch for very specific techniques, like Jordan Burroughs, for example. Every time somebody starts asking me about double legs, like how do you do this the right way, I'll refer them, Jordan Burroughs, watch that guy, watch how he sets up his double leg, watch how he drives through, watch how he finishes. Guys like Kyle Dake for like leg riding and the way he clinches and breaks a guy down on the ground and so on. What are some wrestlers that you would recommend that our viewers at home interested in the sport of wrestling or even transitioning to jiu-jitsu or mixed martial arts, who would you recommend they watch?
Well, from an MMA perspective, I would definitely recommend, and I would probably go more by nationalities because I've been out of the game for a bit, but in regards to MMA, well, definitely Cormier. He's brilliant at it. He's very good at clinching. He has a very strong wrestling mentality. I would also recommend, I guess if I went down lighter, who else could I talk about? Believe it or not, if you want to see from a striker's perspective, I do know that Chuck Liddell was actually an NCAA wrestler.
Yeah.
He never applied it that much. But you don't ever see anybody take him down.
That's true.
Yeah, so I'd recommend him if you're looking for more of a striking perspective and developing a defense against wrestlers. I know that GSP is not a wrestler, but he does have a very strong takedown attack. And I do know his coach, Victor Zilberman from Montreal. He's quite good at that. I would recommend him just because he's very technical at it. And I think he's good to study because he doesn't come from that developed discipline. And so it's probably more of a good person to see who's transitioned to developing that technique.
Yeah, GSP is a really interesting case study because, again, he never wrestled in high school, never wrestled in college, started wrestling after he had already been pretty deep into his MMA career. And today he is often touted as the best wrestler for mixed martial arts who has ever lived by many, pound for pound.
Yeah. Besides that, Chael Sonnen has noted that, so just letting you know that it's not from my point of view. But Chael Sonnen has also always noted himself that, and actually he's another person I would look at. He's a very good wrestler in MMA. He's always known that Greco wrestlers seem to transition better into MMA. And, after I looked at it a bit more, I'm just like, yeah, he's kind of right. Henderson, Couture, all that. And then I'm just like, okay, yeah, there's something actually very feasible there. So that's also good too. And also, an argument came up if Sanderson would be good to emulate. Sanderson's very good for wrestling. You'll never find a better American wrestler, in my opinion. I think he's the best American wrestler ever made.
Kyle Sanderson, man.
Yeah, like
crazy good ankle picks.
Yeah, very good. But all of his wrestling's sound. And if you watch his Olympic winning match against the Korean there, I forget that Korean's name. It was very, very controlled, very fantastic wrestling. So yeah, I would recommend him. And then in regards to just overall wrestling, you can't go wrong with the Eastern Bloc. You look at the World Championships every year, it's usually somewhere in Russia or the Eastern Bloc or one of the stands. They're just well-developed wrestlers, and something you'll notice from them the whole time is they're very relaxed, they're very patient, and they just have high level of fitness.
And since coming to China, I've had the chance to train with so many people from these Eastern Bloc countries, and man, I had no idea how prevalent the physical culture, the wrestling culture is in those countries. It's like anytime I meet somebody from a country ending in stan, they know how to wrestle, and not just a little bit, at least to what a degree I would say is pretty good. And when I asked them, like, hey, how'd you learn how to wrestle so well? They're like, I'm not a good wrestler. I'm just, okay. I'm just normal.
Yeah. That comes down to the fact. I remember I heard that podcast I heard that video you did, and it's really that's it. It's every wrestling culture, that combat or even combative culture is very accepted in those societies, and they start at a young age, and usually because of a couple of reasons. One, it's cheap. It's cheap to have a wrestling mat and throw a bunch of kids on it and develop like a community around that, or develop something for them to do, and it's a discipline. So why most parents will be like, yeah, that's good, then you do that and you start early enough, you develop a really good athlete. It can be any sport.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You don't have to get a whole ice rink and hockey sticks and pads and skates and all that to wrestle, man. It's so true. Let's talk about private security for a while. Now, Michael, you were a bouncer for, what was it, 8 years?
About 8 years, close to a decade, yeah. I did bouncing for a long time in my hometown, and I did every type of club you can think of, and yeah, it was an interesting experience.
I imagine you have some stories about that. I had an interview with, Big Dave, who worked security, but in the as a bodyguard, and he described that as a pretty boring job, like 99% of the time, and then 1% of the time, something crazy happens. Is it like that being a bouncer, or is it you see a lot more?
That's considerably accurate. Yeah.
Okay.
It's any type of private security, but especially I would look at it this way: bouncing was mainly, 95% of doing nothing. But the thing is, you have to force yourself to be vigilant the entire time. That's really it. 95% nothing, but then you go straight from 0 to 100 in a snap. So that's really it. The majority of nights, no problem. That's really it. But yeah, it can be very much like that. I think some things that may factor more into bouncing is, because I don't say 99% doing nothing, it's 95% doing nothing, is because, and I really don't know because I never did private security that much in those type of venues, but in bouncing, you're dealing with lots of substance elements. And so when a person is on a substance, they're just more likely to be violent. So you just have to be a bit more careful. Yeah.
Indeed. Man, my first experience actually seeing a bouncer, because I don't go to clubs, I don't go to bars, I don't drink or anything like that, but when I started fighting, all of the fights, I started as a kickboxer, later transitioned to MMA, but all the kickboxing matches were held at these nightclubs. And I remember looking at the bouncers like, man, these guys look way tougher than the fighters. Am I in the wrong profession here? Or are they in the wrong profession? But there is something about that culture of people being in a club or a bar and intoxicated and just all this posturing that goes on. I talked to Ned the other day about people who would watch these fights and they'd get drunk, and then afterwards sometimes even try to pick fights with the fighters. How often did the situation escalate into violence?
Not as much as you would think, and it's actually very funny that you brought that up. Your perception of the bouncers. Bouncy's an interesting subculture, and it's actually filled of a very interesting cast of characters. And actually, you'll be very surprised by a lot of these guys are extremely intelligent, very intelligent. Some of the smartest guys I ever met were bouncers. They may not have a formal education, but I'm telling you now, they are devilishly smart. And all of them do have a very good understanding of nonverbal communication and the psychology involved in it. You must, if you want
would have to.
You would have to. So a big things that actually are able to mediate between full like actual conflict is just how you hold yourself. And so the reality is, and I'm not going to be pulling figures out here, but most studies would agree with me that most communication that's input into a human being is through the nonverbal communication. And so what you can tell of a bouncer is this. I got lots of death threats. I got lots of threats. I got lots of posturing. I got lots of peacocking. I got all of it. Not just me, but anybody who's worked the doors for a long time.
Yeah.
You just need to be able to hold yourself and present very obvious body language. Now, does that mean being aggressive? No. But I'll give you an example. And this is one I used almost all the time. If somebody was being hostile with me at the door, usually, I wouldn't let them in, or, maybe we just threw them out and they were getting in my face, There's a couple things. One, you have to know the law of the land you're at. In Canada, assault laws are pretty cut and dry. Also, it's based upon property. So, like, if I am the security for a property, you're on the property presence, I can have a lot of means at my disposal to deal with you. If I'm on the property line and you're kind of off of it, then you have to be very cautious. But also, you want to be cautious anyway, because fights are not what they think. It's not Patrick Swayze Roadhouse. I mean, if you're not paying attention, you're going to get hurt. So there's a very specific type of nonverbal communication you should bring across that's not either too aggressive, but aggressive enough. What I used to do is this. Guy would be threatening me. One, I wouldn't usually make eye contact with him. I wouldn't. Instead, I would immediately put my head and eye direction right at basically his torso. His torso, and most importantly, his hands. I would have it there the whole time. And then if it was a group of three, I would still be doing it with three of them. And usually also, because I usually worked at very good places, there was another man there with me. So it reduced the danger a little bit.
So strategically in fighting, that makes a lot of sense. That is what I tell my students to do, to look at the torso instead of the eyes. And that's for a very specific reason, to lower the head and bring your forehead closer to any oncoming strikes. And also, if you're looking at the torso, you'll see movement from the shoulders and hips before they come from the hands, for example. But why would you do that?
Well, I would do it for a couple of reasons. One, to be prepared for a fight, just like you said. Every time that unfortunately, I was in quite a few street fights. Reasons why I didn't get seriously hurt. I never got seriously hurt, thankfully. A lot of it was due to, one, being lucky, two, being prepared through my own training, and three, knowing what to do in these scenarios, which was looking down, being aware of their hands. Another reason is looking at the torso, looking at the hands. I want to see where the body's moving. I want to see where those hands are. If they got a knife, it doesn't matter if you're big. So you want to know, and you want to make sure you're not going to get suckered. And so I would do that. I would also have stances are different in wrestling than in striking, but I would have my right foot out in basically a position where I can engage the opponent really quickly. So I'd already have a foot forward. And then I would just have my hands right here to the side, and I'd be speaking to him in a very calm way. I wouldn't be aggressive, but I would also be very flat, almost monotone. I'd be like, "Sir, you must leave this premises now, or we will contact the authorities." So I'd also make it clear that there would be actual like real authority coming. I mean, technically I am an authority, but bouncers, when it comes down to it, we're not the absolute most scared authority out there. That's the police.
Okay.
So things like that. And here's the thing. Whether or not people wish to admit it, they all understand that body language. This guy, whatever he's on, whether he's just drunk or he's on substance, the back of his brain, in that really subconscious area of it, he's sending out signals going like, okay, this guy's actually ready. This guy's ready. This guy's ready. My threats aren't doing anything. I don't know if I can actually, he's larger than me. I don't think I can actually take him. So things like that. So usually what happened a very large percentage of the time is they just, they give a stiff upper lip. There'd be some choice words. They tell me they'd be coming back, and I'd be like, okay, we'll see you later. Call the cops.
That actually reminded me a lot of working customer service at a video rental store back when those still existed.
Awesome.
Believe it or not, I had a lot of belligerent customers come in.
Yeah.
Yes, I used to work. Hold on, did we lose? Let me turn up the contrast just a smidge here. There we go.
Oh, great. Now I'm even...
Sorry, adjusting the camera slightly. We got some natural light outside. Sun's moving behind clouds. But yeah, working customer service, people get angry. I don't think until you've worked like a menial minimum wage job like that, you don't realize how crazy people can get. Like, I remember this one time this dude came in and he had some like minor grievance and he wanted to be compensated for it with like, I don't know, free video rentals for life. And he's gotten up in my face shouting, like threatening me with violence. And I'm just staring, I'm like, go ahead, hit me. I don't care. I work a minimum wage job. I didn't say any of this, but this is my internal monologue. If you hit me, I would rather have a nice settlement from that in a court of law than have to work this crappy job anymore. So cool, go ahead. And so essentially I projected this idea of, I don't care what you do, sir, go ahead. And when he saw that, it was just like he went from, being big and tough and aggressive to just deflated, like, what? I have no power. Because I often say, whoever cares more in any specific relationship, and I'm not talking about romantic relationships necessarily, but any interpersonal relationship, whoever cares less has the power in that relationship. So when he saw I didn't really care, again, his power was gone.
Mm-hmm.
So
that's really it. It's psychology, and like being the fact that they are aware that you are prepared. That's really it. Now, the times that I did get hurt, because it did happen. The times I did get assaulted in my my door career was when I was not ready, when I wasn't prepared. Almost, and it's actually just quite a bit of camera footage each time. Every time that I got into a bad assault was because I took my eyes off of the person who was of the aggressive party, basically. So a couple of occasions, like, usually happen because there's something else happening behind me, and so I'd be like, I'd turn my head like a dummy, and I'd be like, and then boom, right in me. And so that's what usually happened. Thankfully, I still won those fights, but mainly because of other reasons. Mainly because I was just bigger and tougher, or thankfully I had another coworker next to me who immediately assisted me, or the fact that I was just, I'm a licensed. I was a licensed doorman. I had authority on my side too. Like, those are the reasons. But each time that an assault did occur on me was because I turned myself away from that person. That's really it. Every time that happened, or every time as I did not take stock of everybody in the group, because it's usually one person, it's many people. Other times it's because I was focusing too much on one person and there was another person beside him. Those are almost always what happens. When it comes to actual fights, usually, one, I'm usually bigger than the other guy. Most guys do not want to take a swing at a larger man who's ready. That's just, that's good common sense by that person.
Yeah.
So that's really it. So that's what I can tell you there. It's a lot of psychology.
Yeah, an assault generally takes place if one person feels they have a very specific advantage, either size, weapons, or superior numbers.
Yeah, exactly.
So street fights, let's talk about that for a minute, because I get so many comments on YouTube about street fights. Most of the comments I get are pretty positive, but I get a lot of people who chime in saying, you see, Ramsey, what you don't understand is that in the streets there's no rules, and you practice for this combat sport, and you don't understand the difference between sport fighting and real fighting. And they go on to the point where they're essentially saying, if you train in a martial art or a combat sport, you're actually going to be at a disadvantage in a street altercation.
That's a load of rubbish, and that's a load of hooey. That's a load of nonsense, and I say that very confidently. I was very lucky in my career, actually. I know this one fella. His name is Randy King. He is a fantastic martial artist and former bouncer, and he has studied numerous disciplines. And big shout out to Randy King, the KBC Fight Club of Edmonton. Hope you see this, Randy. Funny thing about Randy, he is easily the most happy-go-lucky man I've ever met. Like, to a T. He's like, hey, how you doing? Oh, it's so nice to meet you. It's like, oh, you want to see a picture? This is my daughter. And just like, and you, the whole time you think, this man can cut me 6 ways to Sunday. Because Randy's very good at eskrima. He's very good at using knives. He has had considerable Krav Maga training, like really actual good, authentic Krav Maga training. He goes to the sources. He spent like up to 3 months every couple of years in the Philippines working on specific knife combat and stick combat. And then he also takes from everything. He finds what's practical in his system, he takes from it, or he becomes developed into licensed systems. And like it's not like he talks out his butt. This man's very much contracted out by my provincial government and police forces in my province to develop security for sheriffs or police. And he also has been very, very sought after for just self-awareness, self-defense training. Because like the reality is self-defense is more than just, knowing street combat. He's always, and the funny thing is, I got to know him and he actually hired me to be a wrestling coach for him because he understands the benefits of all forms of combat. That's ridiculous to say that you can't use anything. Yeah, these people need to understand if there are no rules, then you can use anything. That's really it. Like, it's silly to say otherwise. Now, the big thing about this is people who don't know. Well, that's a good thing. That means you haven't been in a street fight. You really shouldn't be in street fights, okay? They're terrible.
I concur.
I've been in many street fights. I was absolutely terrified the whole time. I do not like them. I do not care if I'm larger than them. Let's put it this way, I'm a very naturally aggressive man, but I wouldn't call myself a man of violent tendencies. So that's the big thing. I have a good rationale. So I'm just like, oh, this is not good. So that's the thing. That's silly that those people would say that. You should use everything possible to your disposal if you're in a street fight. And even more importantly is you should use everything at your disposal to avoid street fights.
Amen to that.
That is the biggest thing. You should not be in a street fight at all. And you know what? The funniest thing that I always hear is you do those fantastic women self-defense videos. You ladies, do you know what's actually probably the best weapon you can have in self-defense? Your phone.
Why's that?
Well, I'll tell you why. You're walking down a street, and if you feel like you're in danger, you just open your phone and you call somebody and you say very loudly, there's somebody following me, contact the police. Or maybe call 911. It's like, hello, 911, there's a man following me. It's like, oh, you can't use emergency channels like that. Well, maybe it is an emergency. I'll tell you now, if you do that loudly enough, the person who's probably following you is going to go the other direction.
That's entirely possible.
Also, other things, stay in lit streets. Don't go down alleyways. And everybody's like, oh, but I want to. It's like, oh, well, the world's not fair, okay? Be aware of your environment. Other things, don't listen to music if you feel like you're going to be a victim due to being in a specific region. Pay attention to your surroundings, okay? These are really simple things to do.
Yeah, isn't it funny, like almost every attack, self-defense situation, narrative takes place in a dark alley.
Yeah, I don't know.
Where nobody's around to see.
Just like your Eunice said, it's I'm not going down no dark alley, man. Well, why would I? Like, seriously, what is it? Is this 1945? Is this some sort of Humphrey Bogart speakeasy? No, get out of here. I'm not going down there.
Indeed. Yeah. Which reminds me of something that's always confused me about the origin of Batman. Is the Waynes. You're familiar with the Batman story?
Of course, absolutely.
Mr. and Mrs. Wayne and young Bruce, they're walking down a dark alley, and this is a very affluent family, a family that could afford a mansion and butlers and fancy cars. Why are they walking down a dark alley? I mean, come on. That is probably the most unrealistic thing about the Batman story. Not the fact that this guy puts on a crazy costume and fights crime at night, but that right there, in my opinion.
Yeah, I would agree, yeah. And you just ruined that for me. Thanks,
Sorry,
Randy.
I've debunked Batman, guys.
No, but it wasn't just that, man. I thought I had a chance to be Batman. No, okay. So, besides that, and then I hear other things about self-defense. Like, what do you do if a guy has a knife on you? There's two guys. Like, you comply with them. Like, obviously, you comply with them. You've had very direct experience of muggings more than me. I've never been mugged. I've been assaulted, but I've never been mugged. And I've experienced weapons a few times, but thankfully they were kind of farcical. One, the guy actually grabbed a gun, he tripped, he fell, another guy punched him in the head, and then the cops showed up. It was actually quite funny. So I went from from shitting myself to complete laughter. But and the other ones were with knives, machetes, but again, it was a realistic scenario. We all kept our distance. We were not trying to engage these people. We were trying to just keep our distance, keep a barrier. That's very honest. So and we're huge men, and we were wearing Kevlar vests. Like, we could probably take a knife, but we don't want to. So that's the thing. So if people say, what do we do? You comply with them. What I was always told is this: you always comply with an aggressor in a situation like that, unless they are trying to move you. Because when they move you, that very likely means they're going to escalate the crime. So, for example, unfortunately with women, if a man's trying to move you, there's probably a very understandable option that's coming onto the table. So, yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. As for other people, maybe kidnapping, who knows? So things like that. So that's what I was always told. Always comply unless they're trying to move you.
Yeah, if it's a simple mugging, something like that, they make it pretty plain. Give me your money.
Yeah, exactly.
Something like that.
That's all they want. They want your money. That's it. There's no science to it. If they're trying to move you, they want something else. And that means the crime is escalating. Because why are they moving? They're moving you somewhere private. Now, internet people, is this going to happen to you? Probably not. Especially if you live in places like America and Canada and France and the UK. You have relatively decent systems. You have good policing. You do have decent judicial systems, okay? Now, everybody's like, oh, it's not as good as it used to be. It's like, it's the same. Shut up. You're a silly person, okay?
There are going to be a lot of angry comments about that. I just know it.
That's fine.
That's fine.
What are they going to do? Here, come to Shanghai. Give me a rightful earful.
Oh, man, you'd be amazed how many people have called me out in the comments. Not a lot, but a few interesting folks on the comments saying, I would destroy you in a fight if I could just afford a plane ticket to fly over to China. Like, okay.
Yeah, I know. But that's the thing. And that's the thing about the internet. Everybody's an expert, right?
Yeah.
Me, I'm not an expert. I'm not an expert in anything. I just have a lot of life experience. And from what I've been seeing from my life experience, and from the fact that I do have some professional credentials in some areas, is this. Most of the stuff that you're saying is wrong. Yeah.
Well, one thing about self-defense advice, because anytime you teach any martial art, people are going to ask you about self-defense. And I make it very clear, I'm not a self-defense instructor. It's not what I do. I teach people to win fights, and that is really the polar opposite of self-defense. Self-defense is avoid a fight. It's remove yourself from the danger. Mm-hmm. A combat sport is you are the danger. You finish the fight. So really, it's the polar opposite there. But good self-defense advice, I find, is often the most boring. Like, I had this guy ask me, and I've been asked this more than once, what if you're in a club and some guy starts hitting on your girl? What do you do about that? I said,
well, you grab Moose and Jughead, and the rest of the Riverdale gang is like, hey, you stop hitting on Betty and Veronica. It's like, come on.
Well, the thing is, it's not a self-defense situation. I mean, that's a pride issue. I mean,
yeah,
man, there's absolutely no reason to fight in that situation. I mean, it might hurt right here and your heart right there, but those are just feelings. And fighting over feelings, that's the wrong reason to fight.
Exactly. And that actually brings up a very big point. Lots of people who talk about self-defense, they're talking about people who are being aggressive but not being violent. And there's a very distinct difference, okay? In all my years of bouncing, and of course, as I was younger, I was more aggressive also. Now, as I got older in bouncing, people would be like, it's like, can I come in? I'd be like, and then at this point, I was working in dive bars because I knew the owners and it was very easy. And they allowed me to have complete control because there's a lot of politics when you have a popular club that makes money. So if you're not at one of those, you get a lot more leeway. So a guy would come up and say, hey, can I come into your bar? I'd be like, nah. It's like, why not? You're short? It's like, it's not a good reason. You got to give me a reason. It's like, no, I don't. It's like, why do you think I have to give you a reason? It's like, because you have, it's like, no. This is private property.
That's the funny thing about human psychology is if we simply give a reason, even if it's a crazy reason, people are much more willing to comply, like especially children. Like my children will often ask me, why can't I do this? Why can't I do that? And just give them any reason. And then they stop and the gears start turning and they're like, oh, okay.
Yeah. And so this happened to, like, obviously being a bouncer for a long time, or not just me, a bunch of people I knew, they would experience this outside of their job. People would come up and be aggressive with them. Now, what do most of these men do? Well, in all honesty, they could give a shit. They just went on with their night, especially when they know they're in a place where they have a lot of sober security guys around them that they know. But also, they didn't posture back. Most of these guys I know just did not care. They didn't have anything to prove. So they're like, a guy who's being aggressive with you, just let it go. It's not the end of the world. Like, pride is not really a big thing in the real world. And so it was like, unless, like, the only time I would say otherwise is if they actually do something physical to you, then obviously, yes, then that is a problem. But if it's just words, then no, it's silly.
Now, here's a self-defense concept I've been thinking about a lot lately, which is one of the big problems with all these women's self-defense videos, like the ones I try out on my YouTube channel and whatnot. Where they go wrong is that they start the self-defense too late because they're often addressing a worst-case scenario.
Yeah.
And the earlier you start to defend yourself, the higher your chances of success. But where a lot of other people go wrong is essentially starting a fight in the name of self-defense.
Yeah.
So coming from a bouncer perspective, at what point do you feel it is appropriate to physically intervene?
Lots of guys will give you different answers to that. But basically, you can, as an agent, a security agent for a private premises, I'm given authority to intervene whenever I want. It's also to be aware of the situation. As you get older with the job, you get better at it. You're able to see you're able to usually see who's going to be a problem and whether you want to deal with them later on. Yeah. Then you're also going to see if there's any hostilities between two people. Usually what happens is when, I don't know if you have this word in American vernacular, but when boys start chirping each other.
Chirping each other. No, we definitely don't say that.
Chirping is when, it must be Canadian. When guys go up to each other and they just start, having words with each other. That's when they start chirping. That's usually when we would intervene. And first we would we try to be diplomatic. Usually what would happen is maybe either one man who would notify the rest of them, so like, hey, I'm going to check out a scenario here. Or it's like, and then we'd have coding systems too. So that's how it would work. And then you go up and you'd say, hey boys, what's going on? What's the problem? And then you'd be able to understand very quickly. Either some guys would immediately defuse and they'd be like, oh, look at that, we're being jackasses. And they would, we let it be. Unfortunately, most of the time, usually because of substances, guys would immediately go, it's like, well, this guy's doing this guy's doing that. And they'd be like, boys, we can't have this, okay? And then basically from there, you'd have to make a decision. Usually, if it's a specific coding system, confrontation like that would probably be more like a code 2 or a code 3, something like that, where there could be heated hostility. Code 1s are kind of like, this dude's drunk, get him out. It's like, okay. Or this guy's being a jackass and it's just one single dude, get him out. It's like, okay. So we'd have like a couple of guys there. And then once you have that imposing presence, they would just stop. Usually. Sometimes they wouldn't. It really depends. Some guys can go absolutely wild. Yeah.
All right. You know what? Let's take a few questions from the viewers that they've sent in. I usually answer these by myself, but I'm gonna get an outside opinion on this one. Here's a simple one from our friend Schwingalonga Ding Dong. Interesting screen name. He or she says, "How do you find training cardio and strength at the same time?" There is a study that shows intense cardio training interferes with strength gains, and that is true. It causes a catabolic state. Do you just train really hard in everything, or are you more focused on certain areas?
That's actually quite simple to explain, really. At least in wrestling, what you would do is in the summertime, you do when you're like in off season, you do very heavy lifting. You're developing your strength gains then. Developing them then. Then you just do strength exercises to maintain after that. So you just have to really pick and choose the time you're doing your training. That's really it. That's for really any sport. If you're trying to develop strength, you develop strength usually in the off season. And then during the season, yes, it is difficult to make strength increases. So that's why you're just in maintenance mode after that, and you're focusing on your overall fitness abilities for whatever sport you're doing.
Yeah, now wrestling is an interesting sport, especially considering compared to MMA, because it is a seasonal sport. There's a season where you're just always doing it, always wrestling, always competing, and then you've got that off season. Whereas with professional fighting, it's you depending on the fighter, I would say in the West, American fighters every so many months they'll have a fight and they'll prepare, they'll build up to that point, they'll have a training camp, they'll have the fight. There's like this wind down phase, and then you repeat, and so on. And weight cutting is this big, almost ritual sort of thing. But wrestlers, they're just always in that grind for the season. Let's talk about weight cutting for a second. Yeah, because I remember all my wrestler friends back in high school, they were just always focused on maintaining that very specific weight all the time during the season. Whereas MMA fighters, it's often more of a matter of, how do I cut this huge chunk of weight in this very specific time frame, like once every 3 months or so? How did you deal with that?
Well, for starters, I went from heavyweight to light heavyweight, so for me, it wasn't really as big an issue. Were there sometimes difficult cuts? Yeah, but not nearly as intense. Probably the worst one was I used to go from about 100 to 90 for university wrestling, because they had different weight categories in university than in the amateur Kawa divisions. And so I used to go from 100 to 90, but for a large man, that's not too hard.
That's kilograms for my American friends watching.
Yeah, so 90 is about 200 pounds, and I'd be going from basically 225 to 200. In all honesty, 25 pounds is not a big cut for a large man. And then usually by then I'd be 98, hovering around. So what's basically, for lighter weights, it's very difficult. I used to always see my teammates, they'd be so pissed off. They just, they'd be cutting weight, they'd be rationing their food. When it came down to the last day or two, they'd be rationing their water. They're resting a lot, usually wearing layers to sweat more. You leave the sauna till the very end. You don't want to do that till the very end. Now, weight cutting, let's make it very clear. Much like everybody else, I do not encourage weight cutting. It's unhealthy. It will ruin your metabolism. You may have internal organ issues afterwards if you do it continuously.
Yeah, especially if you're cutting more than 10% of your body weight. That can be catastrophic.
Yeah, and also I really don't recommend it for really light people. So like I was telling you, like the really lightweight guys, when they're doing weight cutting, it's really hard on their system. But yeah, my experience of weight cutting wasn't too bad. Don't encourage it, but again, not unhappy I did it, because I found a bit more success at a lower weight. But basically, this is what I found. Coming into the season, my diet had to change considerably. Then also I was training considerably more, so I would be doing, the strength training would be done. I'd just be doing maintenance, and then I would be increasing my cardio. Running was a good way to do that. Then just continuous wrestling drills, wrestling exercises were good for that too. And then basically, this is how it would work once you get to about a week to 2 weeks before a tournament where you're going to weigh in. You should do things like, count your calories, or count how much food you're taking in. And then maybe, depending on how bad your weight is, you may have to start limiting food. And then maybe the day of or the day before, you may have to cut out water. Now, this is all dangerous, but that's what you may have to do because you're trying to shed that water weight. When it came down to the very end, if I was having a hard cut, I'd be wrestling a lot, doing lots of drills, wearing layers. And then at the end of each night, what I would be doing is I'd be sitting in a sauna. I'd be drinking a lot of water because I want to be able to have my body have the ability to flush out a lot of water. And I'd be doing that if, a few days before, we're having sauna parties, as they're called, just sitting there. If a guy's smart, he brings in a stereo that can handle the heat. We're all just like, life sucks. Yeah. So do that. And like I said, day of the weigh-in, you may not be drinking water, but if you were smart and you planned correctly, you're fine. So you just be working your way down to it. Now then, what happened immediately after the weigh-in? We're usually given 24 hours to recover. Now, from what I understand, in America in the NCAA, they don't do that. Weigh-ins are the same day, so that's kind of eliminated cutting, which I think is kind of good. I've heard that. So don't know if they do that in my country yet, though. But I actually think that's a positive thing. Make people wrestle where they're supposed to.
That makes a huge difference. When I started fighting, the organization I started kickboxing for did day of weigh-ins. Mm-hmm. And so there was very, very little weight cutting, and if there was, it was maybe 2 or 3 pounds just to make the next weight class down. Nobody was trying to cut like an extra weight or 2 weight classes below that, because that would just kill you the day of.
Exactly. Yeah. So then afterwards, actually, I was very tricky. I used to get I don't know if you have in America, but we had these things called.
Keep going. I'm going to turn down the contrast. The sun came out again.
The sun's come back, kids. 1 second.
Keep going.
Anyway, what I would do is I'd find there's medicine for kids in pharmacies. It's basically Pedialyte. It's super concentrated electrolyte drink for children when they have diarrhea or vomiting. And so this stuff is fantastic for making you rehydrated. So I'd buy like 2 liters of that and just drink it back. And then that would help me recover all my electrolytes. And then besides that, milk is good for that too. So then I would take in there you go. Okay. So then I would take in the Pedialyte, and then I would take in some milk, and then I would take in some water. And then I do all that first before I had solids, and I would slowly drink. If you chug, that's going to be huge damage to your system. Then almost everybody goes in carbo loads. Lots of guys like pasta, and I was never a pasta man. It always upset my stomach. Instead, I usually went and got a baguette. I make like big sandwiches out of them. But again, you have to be careful. If you eat too fast, it's really going to affect your body. But that's really it. And then you just try to rest as much as you could before the tournament.
Indeed. Man, that's always perplexed me, being able to do that week after week after week, as opposed to just a once in a while thing. Here's another question. I think this is an interesting one. This one comes from our friend Brian Walrand. He says, I have a question. I have a problem with relaxing my body and my muscles. They tend to stay tense even with stretching. My coaches have said being relaxed is necessary to be explosive. So what suggestions do you have for staying relaxed during a fight? And thanks for the great videos. Great question, Brian.
That's a good question by Brian. And if it's a muscular problem, well, it could be a few things. It could be psychological, it could be just physiological. But your coaches are 100% right. Good on your coaches. You need to be relaxed especially when you grapple. Well, especially when you fight in general. You need it for explosiveness, and if you won't, you'll become exhausted. So, what can you do? I guess there's a few things you can do, but it really depends where the problem is coming from. But believe it or not, and some people may think I'm silly for saying this, but I would probably say yoga is a good thing to maybe get into.
Why yoga?
Just the whole point is to be able to stretch out and relax your muscles, be in a meditative state. It's good that way, and I really recommend it. In fact, I did Bikram hot yoga for years when I was wrestling. It really, it helped me cut weight because it's in a hot environment. 2, it really stretches out your muscles and helps you recover.
Yeah, I would say yoga, especially when done correctly, it's really about the connection between breath and movement.
Yeah, and
when we're able to do that, we're able to connect and exhale with the ability to relax and release muscular tension.
Yeah, so that's what I would recommend. Now, in regards to what style of yoga, I don't really know yoga that well. I did a specific style because I was told it was effective, and I did it. So I did Bikram yoga, but that's very hot yoga. If you want to try that, go ahead. If you want to try a different style, go ahead with that too. But yeah, I think that's a possible way to move forward with that. Besides that, you could try meditative practices. You can maybe try to do considerably more stretching beforehand and afterhand. But yeah, there could be a number of reasons why your muscles are tense, Brian. Yeah.
And I would add to that, there's no replacement for experience. A lot of times I see new fighters, new athletes get really nervous. And when we're filled with nervous energy, there's no way to relax. And relaxing, it really is the best thing to do. But when somebody's attacking you, that's the last thing we consciously think of. So you have to get comfortable being uncomfortable. Yeah. And that comes with experience.
Yeah, it really does. Everybody I've ever taught in wrestling, they are stiff for maybe the first 2 years. It takes time for your muscles for you just to be in a state of comfort with grappling with another person, fighting with another person. I mean, That's why coming to MMA, which I really enjoy, I'm not as tense. Like I know this situation. I'm used to it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think this is a big part of the reason why wrestlers tend to transition so well to the sport of mixed martial arts is because they're already comfortable being uncomfortable. I used to coach a lot of wrestlers for mixed martial arts back in the U.S. when I opened up my first gym. And I found it was almost like they were just ready-made fighters, and you just had to teach them a couple of things and a few concepts and drill some stuff and do a little bit of sparring, and then they could be ready within a few months for like an entry-level fight. Mm. And the average person, though, they lacking that experience, there is so much nervous energy there, so much tension, and it takes a great deal of time to get somebody like that to that relaxed state under tension.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing too. I mean, they're pre-developed combative athletes, and the big difference is we have higher volume of fights under our belt. I mean, you can call a wrestling match not a fight if you want, but it is a fight. You're in a ring with another person, and you're trying to submit them to your will. That's a fight, okay?
Yeah.
So when you have multiple tournaments, maybe 2 tournaments a month, maybe once a month, but at least, you're having at least possibly, let's say you do 1 tournament a month. And let's say you're a bad wrestler. You're probably having at least 24 wrestling matches a year. And that's if you're a bad wrestler.
What if you're a good one?
If you're a good one, then you're maybe having up to, well, let's say it's a bracket, it's a large bracket. So maybe, and let's say you have 4 to 5 matches in a large tournament bracket. So let's say once a month, just theoretically, once a month. So 5 times 12, 60. You could have maybe up to 60 wrestling matches.
Oh, wow. That's huge, man.
Yeah.
I always say your first 10 fights are going to suck. And I'm not just talking about your first 10 professional mixed martial arts fights, but your first 10 experiences in a live combat situation against a resisting opponent. They're going to suck.
Oh, yeah, they're terrible.
For a lot of reasons. And a big part is you just won't be able to relax. You'll be in this very, the state of hypertension, essentially. Your heart's going to be racing. You won't know how to handle it in the most efficient way. So if you have the opportunity to have experience before you transition to professional or even amateur mixed martial arts, outside of that, like wrestling or boxing or karate or just some type of combat sport, I would chalk that under amateur experience.
Yeah.
So if you can get those 10 amateur fights, I'm putting amateur in air quotes right there, in before you even think about stepping in the cage, you're going to be so much better off than the guy who doesn't.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And another big thing is with wrestling is wrestling has probably the most aggressive combative tournaments for young people at a very young age. Now, I'm not saying that Taekwondo and karate are not aggressive. I'm not saying that they're not beneficial to children, but are you really having a 7-year-old doing a full-on out fight in a Taekwondo or karate tournament? I don't really think so.
I mean, not really. Taekwondo is in an interesting situation because you can win by knockout, which is potentially damaging, but at like the 7-year-old level, we don't see that too often. Now mostly it's points.
Yeah. Now, the general rule of wrestling is, in America, I know there are younger kids who wrestle. I do know that happens, and I know in certain states it's perfectly fine, and not a problem. You're not getting criticism from me here. But in Canada, it's usually have kids come in around 13, 14, mainly because we do see the dangers of the sport, and we want to make sure the child is much more developed before they start engaging in it. Now, again, have things changed in Canada? I don't think so. I don't really see wrestling done with proper matches until junior high. So that's really it. And so, but what I mean by that is, starting at 13, you start getting combative experiences at that age. That makes you just so much more prepared once you're already 20, 22, 23, just you're more ready for it.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've seen that video that's been circulating the internet for a while of Khabib, the UFC fighter, wrestling a bear when he's a little kid.
I've not seen it, but now I want to see that.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's him wrestling an actual bear cub, and yeah, I mean, if you have that type of experience, the ability to grapple with a wild animal like that, I guess it was kind of a tame bear. It wasn't trying to tear his face off or anything.
It's okay, Khabib. He's a very good bear. Don't worry.
Indeed. But yeah, start early. You'll be better off in the long run.
Exactly. That's really honestly the answer to most of these.
And if you didn't start early, like I didn't wrestle as a child, I didn't do any sports as a child. Fear not. If you start now, at least you're going to get somewhere.
Yeah, just need to put more time into it. That's all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I would say adults are generally better at learning stuff than children. Children have the advantage of time on their side. And a lot of people are like, yeah, I should have learned how to play piano as a kid. Okay, maybe. But it's so much better to ask yourself, what can I do right now? Instead of what should I have done in the past, because you know what, I'm a much more efficient learner now as an adult than I was as a kid. Now I can watch a tape, I can watch a video of a fighter and figure a move out. There's no way I could have done that when I was a kid. Now I can basically kind of absorb technique through experiencing it firsthand, and I couldn't do that 20 years ago. No way. I mean, I had to be very carefully shown where to put my hands and my feet and whatnot. So, man, the more you experience something, the easier it's going to be to do. Let's see if we got another question from a viewer. Actually, we got a ton of them.
All right. Throw them out. Let's see what's up.
Okay. Trying to find a more wrestling appropriate one. Let's see. I had this interesting question from a guy basically asking me, and it's a very long question, but why do you fight? Why are you involved in combat sports? I think this guy comes from an Aikido background, and his martial arts philosophy is very much about, as I understand it, harmony. Basically, experiencing combative movements, but finding ways to avoid violence. So it's an interesting philosophy, and I know a lot of people are out there probably typing, Aikido sucks, Aikido doesn't work in a fight, and that's not really his concern. It's more like...
Yeah, actually, I'm quite a big fan of Mori Yoshiba. I love his writings.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, do I practice Aikido? No, but I really don't know. I could never comment on that.
Let me read some of his question here. I just found it. He says... The question is, why is fighting so important to you? He goes on to say, I've been doing Aikido for 20 years, and of course I was and am very interested in self-defense, but it is not the ultimate goal in my life anymore. I realize that what you said in a video, that it is very unlikely to get hurt in the street or even witness a street fight. That's more of the exception, a bad guy jumping out of the shadow than, say, dying of a heart attack when you're old. So I'm not concerned about that. It's much more of a self-improvement type of thing, and to help others do the same than anything else. Hold on. Lost my spot right here. There we go. So what about fighting? Is it the same feeling after all those years? The second part of my question is, why don't you do something less dangerous? People who might have a family, learn to do real fights and make it happen, seem to get unnecessary risk as a regular routine. I'm talking about head injuries, possible brain damage. Is it worth the price of knowing that someone is capable of winning fights? And is it really winning? Or is it just losing less than your opponent? Why don't you teach something less dangerous? Now, I know he's talking about MMA, because MMA fighters are experiencing potential head trauma and all that, but all combat sports are potentially dangerous. I mean, they could potentially...
To expand on that.
Yeah.
This is what I think. Why I fight? Why do I do combative sports
Yeah.
instead of martial arts? Well, there's a couple of reasons. One, it's an outlet for aggression. It's a safe, structured environmental outlet for aggression. And for certain people, that you need that. Me, I was one of them. It wasn't more than just me. Like, to give a bit of background, when I was a kid, I was the fat kid. I also was a bit of an annoying fat kid in retrospect. And so, I had a hard time on the playground. And I also just was not very confident in myself. And so, but I was also a large kid too. Like, I had a natural strength. So I was very angry, but I was also very aware, thankfully, I was very aware that I couldn't present anger at others. My parents are good that way. They made sure that it's like, don't be the bully, don't be the dick. So that's really it. So I needed something though. I needed something to have an outlet, a more structured outlet for me. For me, that was to fight, to be in a safe environment where it was basically like, this is okay. He understands, you understand, you can go at it. And that's really it. And for me, and even now, fighting is therapeutic. It's very much just allows me to be in an area where I can let myself be aggressive in a very structured way, in a very effective way. Like I'm not, and it allows me to channel it correctly. I'm not just like being enraged at people. And that is my reason. Everybody has a reason for going to combat sports. I would say my reason is a very common one. I think I don't think I'm really an exception.
Yeah.
So that's really it. For me, it wasn't that I wanted self-defense or anything to begin with. Like, that's not really it. It's not that I saw beauty or poetry in it. The prosody, the martial arts. No, that wasn't it either. I was an angry kid, but I was smart enough to know that, we're in a society, we have rules, can't go out on the street bashing people's heads in. So I found a safe, structured outlet. And that's why I did it. And I'm very happy I did, and I still love it. I have no plans to ever do prize fighting or anything like that, but that's not the point. The point is, this is a place where I can go in and I can, just come back out completely rejuvenated. Like, I feel after a good sparring, and today I'm actually going to stay the whole class, so I'll be able to do a little bit of sparring later.
Sweet.
I will come out of there, and I was just like, oh, better. Yeah, that's really it. After every class. That's how it is for me anyway.
Oh, yeah. It is super cathartic.
Yeah, exactly. And, I'll go home. I'll just read a book. I'll be super chill afterwards. And that's really it. And, my wife sees the differences, too. I'll come home and she's like, you're relaxed. Like, I had a great fight.
Awesome. Man, I love sparring. There's no nothing like it. Nothing like it.
That one guy, Igor, he said it's good to let off steam. I was like, yes, it is.
Yeah, you've probably seen Igor in some of my other videos. I put up some sparring with commentary. Great guy to train with.
Yeah, and then just to add on to that, he says, well, it's dangerous. Well, everything's dangerous.
Yeah,
everything is dangerous. If you are a triathlete, you can die. I used to do long distance relay races with my father in the mountains. We used to go to do actual races. It was a father-son thing we did, because I do like running. But you know what? Guess what? Every year at this was a 100-kilometer relay race in Kananaskis Valley, Alberta. Almost every year, some dude died from a heart attack.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah. Now, would I proclaim running to be terrible, or it's
Ned was right. Running will kill you.
Right. Is it running instead of Widowmaker? It's like, absolutely not. Like, that's ridiculous. Just, there's always risk to everything.
But yeah, life is going to kill you anyway.
Exactly.
If I were to address that question, again, life is going to kill you anyway. So why don't I do something else? I mean, I got into martial arts like a lot of people did because I was a skinny little nerd who got beat up and picked on, and I wanted to learn how to defend myself. And I watched some Bruce Lee movies, and it looked like, well, he's a skinny guy beating up crowds of people, so I'm going to learn how to do that. It seemed to make sense in my childhood mind. But the reason I continue to do it all these decades later, it's a very different reason. It's something that I enjoy doing. And there's this narrative that a lot of people will paint that people are in combat sports are violent, horrible people, or that they are responsible for atrocities happening in a ring or a cage or whatnot. But yeah, I don't see it that way at all. At all.
No, nicest men I have ever known, really, were fighters. Or men with considerable combat experience. They are nice. They're very pleasant. Good example is
people who have stuff figured out in their lives, man.
Yeah. Good example is I used to help train Ryan Jimmo. For any of you MMA aficionados, Ryan Jimmo was an MMA fighter in UFC, and he has, I don't know if he still has it, but he used to be tied for fastest knockout in UFC history. He was a huge, bald dude, looked like a jacked Mr. Clean. He always did the robot in all this like little pre-dance and post-dance ceremonies. And I used to help train him in wrestling because he trained out of my hometown.
Yeah, he was a tough dude.
Edmonton.
Fought my friend Sean O'Connell once.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I can tell you now, it was like moving a piece of stone. Like, and then he was just like, "Ryan, are you relaxed?" Like, "I'm relaxed. Yeah, it's all good, Mike." And that's the thing. He was very, very pleasant man to be around. Extremely pleasant. Not a violent bone in his body. He just enjoyed fighting. He enjoyed the outlet that it gave him. He enjoyed the fact that he was good at it. So I would say not at all. In fact, I would honestly say not just in wrestling, in most martial art communities, if you have there's a difference between being aggressive and a violent person. And most schools, worth their salt, will not tolerate a violent person in their school or their institution or their center. They won't. A good teacher will say no to that. Say, no, we're here to learn something constructive that has been done for years, and you're just here to try to literally hurt people. There's a difference. When I used to coach high school, I would not tolerate violent kids. I wouldn't. I would try to help them because, they're kids.
Keep going.
But yeah, it doesn't really work that way. Really, it's you just can't tolerate it. So I don't think most fighters are not dangerous. That's what I'm pretty much getting at. And yeah, that looks good now. All right.
Did we get the sun out of our eyes once and for all?
I think we do. I know. I'm looking like Casper here with that sunlight on me.
All right. For the audio-only listeners at home, if you've made it this far into the podcast, we've been dealing with the sun coming through the window, blasting in our faces for the last hour or so. And I think we just sorted out the problem with the curtain.
Yeah.
But yeah, Ryan and Sean, and you can see that in like the weigh-ins, and you can see this on the internet because
did they do the rock paper scissors?
They did the rock paper scissors thing. Yeah, Sean O'Connell, he's famous for always doing something funny before his weigh-ins, and when he fought Ryan Jimmo, they did the rock paper
Jimmo
scissors
would be
thing.
all for that. That's how nice of a guy he was. He was a very nice guy. Unfortunately, he's dead. Sadly, when I heard the news, I was quite saddened by it. It was because of same situations, street fighting, and it came down to the fact that what I've been talking about, being prepared and not being prepared. Jim got an altercation with a man, and this man obviously knew who he was, and he knew he couldn't actually fight Ryan, and I forget what the altercation was about, but the guy huffed off, and Ryan thought that was the end of it. Most of us would, but the guy came back with his car, and he hit Ryan with his car. The car was his weapon. So there you go. That's really it. So that's what I say about all those guys who are self-defense gurus. How you stop the guy with the 2001, Ford Escape, really.
Yeah, it's a totally different situation, man.
Yeah.
It's kind of a sad note to end a podcast on. Let's go to another question,
Fair
man.
enough. Sorry, guys.
Thanks for depressing us so much, Michael. I'm just kidding.
I'm a ray of sunshine.
We just dealt with the ray of sunshine coming in through the window. Let's see here. Okay, here's a question from a friend Tobias with a last name I'm not sure how to pronounce. Stenclift? Tobias Stenclift, perhaps. Okay. He says, do you feel that the increased knowledge of mixed martial arts leads to more defensive fights at the higher levels? He goes on to clarify his question. I've noticed that in many top-level fights, the defensive prowess of the fighters leads to the early rounds being almost completely without moments where you as an audience feel the fight could end. As I've only practiced MMA for about 2 years, in my younger days, I can really appreciate the finer points of all the techniques, so technical fights with no damage are a bit lost on me. I can't help but feel like the earlier days of the UFC, where all the fighters had bigger gaps in their defenses, led to more exciting fights. Basically, the higher trained the fighters are, the more boring the fights are to them.
In wrestling, you can see that to an extent. You watch to an extent. I do understand this question. I still watch high-level wrestling tournaments. I'll watch the World Championships on YouTube. I'll watch the Olympics. And really, when you're at a high level, it's just not as explosive as some other athletes are, because they're usually at the top. Yeah. Now, does that mean they're
skill
not?
sets tend to cancel each other out a little.
To say they're being defensive, no, I don't think that at all. I think both athletes are at such a high level that it appears that they're being defensive, or they are trying to look for offensive position. That's all. That's really it. I can tell you now, when you're watching wrestling at that level, these guys are trying to attack each other, and the rules really push for attacks. Okay, especially the new rules. They push for attacks, and they do hard hand punishment to passivity. So it's not that these athletes are not trying to attack. It's just it is a high level. They know what's coming. They can read each other better. They know all the gaps. They've studied each other's films. Like, I mean, why wouldn't you?
Yeah.
Yeah, like that's just how it is. It's really hard to say. But let's put it this way: are there defensive fighters? Yes, especially if the sport tolerates defensive fighting. It also depends on the sport. In wrestling, they don't really tolerate it anymore. At least in the FILA levels, they don't. Well, in all areas that use FILA rules, and I'm pretty sure in America, in your folk style, collegiate style, they discourage it too, heavily. So that's really it. Are the fighters being passive on purpose? Probably not. But they are at a level where it's just hard for them to get an inch on either of them. Especially because if you're a contract fighter, that's your job. Then your job is to know your opponents well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The first UFC fight that comes to mind when I read this question was a fight that happened probably about 11 years ago between Dong Hyun Kim and Karo Parisian, both of whom are high-level judo black belts. And what we saw in the cage was basically a no-gi judo match. It was super technical, and there was a lot of clinching, a lot of attempts to trip and throw, and we didn't really see a lot of action until, I don't remember which round, but Karo Parisian eventually got the Uchimata, the inside leg trip, got the takedown, and ended up winning the match. And I thought it was a really interesting fight because I like seeing that sort of technical stuff, but I could also see from the average person's perspective, the guys yelling, punch him in the face, those guys
that's
were
really it.
super disappointed.
Yeah, and that's really it. There's another example of a passive fight. The most recent Nagano fight was pretty bad. But again, him and who did he face again? The fella from Louisiana. What's his name? Anyway, he won instead of Nagano, and it was just both guys are powerful hitters, very powerful hitters, and just it's unique sometimes. So, but that passivity, I don't know why that happened, because they should have just been more technical boxing, but there wasn't even that. But in regards to that previous fight you were just talking about, I think it's very odd. I've never seen this fight myself. Yeah. I would enjoy the technical aspects too. I would. But I think that's kind of like bad preparation. If you know you're going against another judo black belt, perhaps see if you can outbox him.
Yeah, and that's one thing I was a little disappointed myself in, because Dong Hyun Kim is a very good striker, and Karo Parisian, he's no stranger to striking himself, but it's almost as if they had a gentlemanly agreement, like, we're not going to trade blows, we're going to do judo, and maybe they felt their striking canceled each other out, I don't know. Maybe possibly not.
But yeah, that's really the answer to that question. The people, the majority of times, athletes are not trying to be passive, but rather more likely is they're just very well prepared.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And on top of that, I would add time limits play a big factor in this question. In the early UFCs that our friend Tobias referenced, which he felt were very exciting, there was no time limit. And when there's no time limit, you're not thinking about time. You're not thinking about how am I going to last 3 5-minute rounds or 5 5-minute rounds. Or in the case of a professional boxer, how am I going to box for 15 rounds? I mean, that's kind of insane to think about. A lot of people will hear them say, like, oh, the fighters, they're feeling each other out. And sure, yeah, that does happen, but it doesn't happen for, let's say, 5 rounds in a row, 10 rounds in a row. A lot of the times fighters are sparing their energy, trying to tire the other guy out. I mean, I had a student, I'm training him, doing private lessons with this young guy. He's really fit, super athletic, plays rugby. Oh, yeah. And you've seen him, David.
Cool.
And
cool dude.
Yeah, he's an awesome guy, but he loves sparring. And he always wants to spar full contact. I'm like, oh man, he wants to spar full contact again. And yesterday we were doing some boxing. He's like, can we go like really hard? And I was like, oh, okay, fine. So my whole plan, because he's new enough where, I can pretty much see everything coming. My whole plan was, I'm tired. I've been here at the gym for 12 hours. I don't want to take a full contact punch to the face. I don't want to risk, bob and weave or anything like that. I'm going to play it super lazy. And so I was just super defensive and just zipped around the ring a little bit, blocked, kept my shoulder up and all that to keep my chin safe until I noticed he started, getting tired. At which point I went on the attack, boom, 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 landed a few shots. And afterwards he was a little, we had a little discussion about that. So yeah, well, I wasn't feeling him out. I was, just waiting, biding my time till this young, energetic guy got a little less energetic and I didn't have to risk so much to get on the inside. And we'll see that same kind of thing again and again in professional fighting.
And I've heard lots of arguments about this, the whole remove time limits or don't have certain round stuff. I personally don't have a problem with it. Time limits, well, because I'm looking at this also from a business perspective and an entertainment perspective, okay?
Yeah.
If you want fighting to be popular, you have to make people fight. You have to prod them to fight. Unfortunately, it sounds kind of inhumane, but that's the honest truth. So that's doing things like, making time, having time limits and rounds and having, immediate decisions on outcomes because of that. Then that makes the fighter go, oh, I have to be aggressive. Oh, I have to push. I have to do this. I have to do that. If you have just like those one rounds like traditional UFC, well, it really depends. But if it's really seasoned good fighters, and like if you transplanted modern day UFC fighters to those old rules, it still take a long time to finish the fight.
Yeah.
It'll take a long time. And no, that's just, to be honest, it's just not entertaining. Does it take away from kind of like the possible spirit of what fighting is? Well, maybe, but if you want your sport to be highlighted, if you want it to be popular, it has to make money.
That's true. I would say probably UFC 1 through 4 were really exciting because nobody knew what it was. We were expecting live action blood sport.
Yeah. And also
the fights were short and quick.
And also it was very much, it hadn't developed into the sport it is. It was very much different fighting styles coming in and fighting each other. It was basically like, finally you had all the drunken bar debates. Like, maybe the karate man could beat the professional boxer. No.
Exactly. But then there was this era that went on for a while before unified rules were penned, where the fighters started getting more savvy to how to win fights, how to manipulate the system and so on. And the fights got really, really boring. They'd be like 30-minute hug fests on the ground without a lot of action taking place. And I remember listening to Tito Ortiz when he started fighting, giving an interview saying, I don't train for a 30-minute fight because I was like the time limit back then, 30 minutes. I train for an hour-long fight or something like that. And I remember hearing that, like, just groaning on the inside, like, I don't want to see people just hugging in the guard for an hour.
Exactly, yeah.
And so even though there's a lot about modern unified rules that I kind of hate because in some ways it makes the sport a little less honest, in my opinion. For example, you can be winning in a totally dominant position and then the bell rings and then you have to start over on the feet. The guy gets a break and the bell saves him.
Yeah, and again, that is, well, I'm sure there's lots of reasons. I actually heard a fantastic podcast by Big John McCarthy because he was very much a big architect of these rules. A lot of times he hated the rules, but he had to give way because of politics. But really what happens is that's good entertainment, man.
Yeah.
It's good entertainment,
it definitely
man.
makes it more entertaining.
Exactly. I mean, and then the guy may come back. I mean, this is what you paid for. You paid to be entertained, and that's what it does. And so I personally do not have any problem with the time limits or the rounds. I think they're just right.
And personally, I would like to see you like 1 15-minute round instead of 3 5-minute rounds. At least I think I would. But again, we never really know until we see that actually happen. Because the 5-minute round, it really does favor the striker. My friend Brandon Ruiz, he's very against the short rounds. He's a fantastic grappler. He's a wrestler and jiu-jitsu black belt and a very accomplished submission grappler. And he's very vocal about the rules that favor strikers versus grapplers. And he would prefer no gloves, no time limits, or at least no rounds, and so on, because he feels that favors a grappler. And here's why. it takes an average of 2 minutes according to UFC statistics anyway, to get a takedown, to get that first takedown. And it takes a lot of energy, of course. And if your opponent can stand up once, it's going to take statistically 2 more minutes to get him back down to the ground, meaning you now have 1 minute left in the round to fight on the ground. And unless your ability to ground and pound and control position and finish the fight with strikes is good, you're probably not going to submit that guy. So if you were able to continue the fight, get that takedown, get another takedown if he gets up, spend 5 minutes doing that, then you could spend the remainder of the fight controlling position on the ground and working to finish there if grappling is your strong suit, and that's where you want to go.
Possibly, maybe.
But the question is, would it be entertaining and would people pay for it?
Yeah, that's the thing, right? I mean, boxing is more entertaining. Unless you're doing wrestling, and I am a wrestler, okay? I am first and foremost a wrestler, kids. But, even I can look outside of my sport and say, wow, boxing, 2 dudes whacking each other with their fists is a bit more entertaining.
Yeah, boxing is a super technical sport, but at the same time, it's one of those sports where if you've never trained in your life, it's super comprehensible. Like I would say, almost every guy who's never trained how to box thinks they know how to box.
Yeah.
But yeah, the more technical a sport has, the more levels it has, like mixed martial arts, grappling, striking, put them together. It runs the risk of being less comprehensible, and I think that's what happened with wrestling when they were threatening to pull it from the Olympics. It's the average person didn't really get it.
That's really it. And also, it didn't help that FILA was not really doing anything to self-promote themselves. They assumed that their position was safe. And also, the guy the Swiss dude who I guess was the head of FILA for a really long time, he was just absolutely useless. And I heard interesting stories about him.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not going to go into them here, but yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but anyway, as far as I know, the organization is pretty solid right now. They understand they can't take anything for granted. For any wrestlers out there that feel like I'm being harsh to FILA, no, I don't think I am. I think you should always be aware that your sport could be on the axe block. That's really it. Don't take it for granted.
Indeed. I mean, mixed martial arts is going really strong right now. It's been consistently the fastest growing sport in the world for a long time now, but the sport itself is only a couple of decades old. Mm-hmm. And that's really easy to forget. It's easy to think, to take it for granted that MMA is going to be around forever. But
who knows?
We don't know, man.
Yeah,
we don't know. It's been on the chopping block already. I mean, it was outlawed in most states in the United States for the longest time.
Yeah, it didn't. Oh, and that whole McGregor incident didn't help. That was in New York, the one place that was really strict about it.
And here in China right now, if you're not aware, we're in Shanghai, China. I mean, MMA it's still a very niche sport. When I first got here to China, it was largely unknown. There were just a few people doing it in the whole entire country. I was one of them. And
yeah, it's also because they're such, they're a harmonious, high context culture.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong, the Chinese guys know how to fight, but just in general, a large percentage of them, they don't, public aggression is kind of frowned upon.
Indeed, and the government loves to regulate everything very tightly, very closely. And so if they felt that MMA was bad or wrong or just not in harmony with their values, they would not hesitate to basically remove it from the People's Republic of China as quickly as possible.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. In fact, not many Westerners ask me about comments about martial arts or MMA. It's usually other Chinese. Like, they usually do have a good curiosity about it. It's like, oh, why do you do this? Why do you do that? I'm just like, oh, these reasons. Stuff like that.
One thing that's really different about China is, they're highly competitive in the Olympics and in all the major Olympic sports, including wrestling.
Yeah, they're pretty okay. Their women are quite okay.
Yeah, but as far as where to train in wrestling in China, unless you specifically train at a sports university or an Olympic training center, it's just not accessible to the public.
I looked forever. Trust me, I did. It's like, I want to find a wrestling gym. Shanghai is one of the largest population cities on the planet. I should find nothing. Yeah. Absolutely nothing. And then finally, I was very lucky, me and Musa Reeves, who's also the other wrestling coach. He's a good NCAA wrestler, good pedigree. He wanted a place to wrestle. I wanted a place to wrestle. You allowed us to go on the mats. We're like, all right, problem solved. Good.
Indeed,
Yeah.
man. It's tough to find a place with a wrestling coach in Shanghai, let alone two. And we were fortunate enough to get two great ones here.
Yeah, and I've asked about that, and lots of I've asked places, do they have wrestling? And they say, well, we don't have wrestling per se, but we have other things similar to wrestling. It's like, well, that's great and all, but I kind of want to wrestle.
Yeah. I've I've heard that a lot, especially with jiu-jitsu. Like, we don't wrestle, but we do jiu-jitsu. It's similar, and
It's like, trust me, I understand what jiu-jitsu is.
yeah.
Yeah, I wasn't born yesterday, but thanks for, treating me like I'm an idiot.
Oh man. Speaking of jiu-jitsu, I don't know how familiar you are with IBJJF rules. It's
Not so much. Basically, whatever you throw me is what I'm learning.
okay. It's the biggest Brazilian jiu-jitsu organization, the biggest governing body of tournaments. And if you watch Brazilian jiu-jitsu tournaments under the IBJJF, what a lot of the fans complain about is guard pulling. So the competitors are usually not actively looking for takedowns, because for a takedown you score 2 points. If you get taken down and you're not a good wrestler, well, you have the option instead to pull guard, so you don't lose points. There's no penalty for it, and then attempt a sweep or a submission off your back. And so this ends up resulting, in my opinion, in some really bad habits for mixed martial arts. And obviously, coming from a wrestling background, a lot of wrestlers find that very confusing.
When guys pull guard?
Yes.
Yeah, it's annoying. It's something I don't like, but I also think it's a smart strategy against a good wrestler with limited jiu-jitsu knowledge.
Oh yeah, with the point system, it's absolutely a smart way to go.
It is. It's annoying. We find it odd, especially coming from our discipline, where it's more about, you have to be aggressive. You do not want to be on the ground, because also you get, in wrestling, of course, the pin is the ultimate submission. It's a win. And then also you get points for exposing the stomach of your opponent and things like that. You just don't want to be there. So, we want to be on our feet. You want to be on your feet in wrestling, and you want to be, engaging your opponent. But again, that's also because we don't have submissions in wrestling, really. I like to say wrestling is a complex form of grappling, but if you have to do a comparison between jiu-jitsu, it's just not, because we don't go against bones. We don't go against joints. We're not doing that. I mean, there's other things that we can do in wrestling that have damage in comparison to jiu-jitsu, like, our throws and our explosive takedowns. Those are very dangerous. But in the end, we just don't want to be in guard. It's not a part of our nature. In fact, it's taken me a long time still to be okay with that. Yeah.
So here's a question, and I'd like to hear your opinion coming from a non-IBJJF perspective, because if I bring this up to my friends who love the IBJJF, they get really mad when I suggest this, because I often suggest, what if there was a jiu-jitsu competition format that basically rewarded you more for takedowns and possibly penalized you for guard pulling? How would that change the sport? Now, I've never seen a organization that does this, although I'd love to give it a try and see what happens. But I think it would change the game quite a bit. We would see more wrestling, more takedowns, more of a top game, and less of that defensive strategy. What do you think?
Outsider's perspective, I think that'd be great, I guess. I don't see what's wrong with it. That just sounds like wrestling, except you can actually submit people, which sounds awesome. That sounds like, you get the full grappling package. Now, maybe jiu-jitsu guys would be like, oh, well, maybe it's something to do with culture or heritage or tradition. I don't know. But I think that's a pretty good idea. I don't see why not. If you're going to grapple, you should engage in all forms of grappling. Now, that's why I think if you want to be an effective grappler, you have to be good at wrestling and jiu-jitsu. You do need both. You need both to succeed in grappling. Now, it can either be wrestling and jiu-jitsu, or it can be any other offensive and defensive grappling style. Let me make this very clear, and I do want to make this clear. I do think jiu-jitsu is a defensive grappling style. It is not offensive. It's not. Does that mean it's not successful? Absolutely not. Jiu-jitsu is extremely successful in fighting, but it's not offensive. Wrestling, the whole point of wrestling is to be offensive. Yeah.
All right. Well, we're close to the 2-hour mark here. That's probably a good spot to end on. Well, Michael Hulbert, Coach Michael, thanks so much for being here on the podcast today.
No problem, Ramsey.
And yeah, thanks for watching out there in internet land. Get out there and train.